So, Jim, really excited for this conversation today. And I was thinking in the lead up to this, I can't actually remember how we became friends and acquainted. So I guess that's a good thing, though, Jim. But maybe can you remember how we first got connected?
I think it was you were speaking at a conference and came across some content you had created, and I was needing it. And then I think there was an opportunity for you. We're speaking here locally, and we got to connect. And I got lost getting you back to the airport or something. So yeah, all those things that the good Lord arranges and chuckles at us at.
Well, it's always a good way to make friends. So whenever I travel around the US, I'll normally put a note in my Facebook group or somewhere saying, "Hey, if anyone's there, let's meet up." So I'm really pleased that we did, Jim. And so you've served in security ministry for a long time, but tell us a little bit about you, where you are, how you got into security ministry, and tell us about your vocation before you primarily focus now with church security.
Yeah, so I started in what we would call IT in its classical sense now, going on in 1982. Got started my first kind of real job. Was doing at the time was doing sound, professional sound and lighting at my church, and professionally as a small company in the Tampa, Florida area. And in that, who's the last person to leave at a church is the sound guy. Well, I found out it wasn't the sound guy; it was the security guy that was locking up the building. And around 1991, 92, I was at a youth event in Colorado, and I had gotten great friends with our security guy, a guy named Gene Thomas, and we got a call that he was a law enforcement officer driving to the church to lock it up, had a heart attack, went into a telephone pole, and died. And I just talked with my pastor, and I'm like, you and I know Gene better than anybody. Most people don't even know Gene exists. And I said, what am I supposed to do? He said, well, pray about it. And woke up the next morning, and I just felt the good Lord says, go do Gene's job. Says nobody will see you. Nobody will know you're there. It'll be a little bit more humbling for you. So signed up, and my first official paying security job was Church of the Security. And so a couple times a day, you get the call and say, Jim, we're done. Can you come lock it up? So locking up, 35 doors, 12 air conditioners, 385 steps up the stairs, and checking all of those things. And did that for about a year, and got my passion for pastors at that point. Of course, learning what pastors go through. But that was the key to get me started there. Professionally, started working for a Fortune 25 company in their security department in 1994. Went to about 15 countries doing that security work. So loved the culture around the world and the unique security apparatus of culture. And then in June of last year, had the opportunity to leave that role and started my own company in July, and enjoying it, and been helping probably about 350 churches and various forums, as you know, Simon, throughout the last 30 years of helping the church, houses of worship, faith-based organizations.
I love it, Jim. And you mentioned a lot of dates in there, and I was born in '78. So you've been in and around safety and security for a long time. So it's good to talk to one of the pioneers. And it's funny, Jim, isn't it? Because, I've been doing church security now for over a decade. I think most probably around 2012 was when I first helping churches. And someone like you've been doing it for 20 years before church security was even a thing, right? And everyone now, a lot of companies put church security on it and say it's, sort of say they're serving the Lord. But why is security ministry so important to you, Jim?
Yeah, I from the church standpoint, and even from my professional side, I really got one of my first mentors that mentored me into security generally really, really focus on this thing we all talk about, the why of what we do. And so when you sit there at 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and the pastor calls you up and says, "I'm finishing up. Can you come lock up?" And you go there and you see what he or she is going through to prepare for messages and things like that. You just understand, how do you take the burden off of the pastoral staff, the staff to be able to minister? And then the other side is to bring a environment that is safe for that single mom to feel okay to drop off their kid and be able to go in and get ministered to herself. And so those whys became really and developed in my world, and in the heart of being a servant. Was just put inside of me. On the professional side, the same way. The why of that Fortune 25 company was very clear to me, and I came in every single day going, how does my day, my priorities, my solutions, how does it affect the why, and does it violate that why? And so, sounds kind of mom and apple pie, but figuring that out, and for the ministry side, how can I pull burden off and environment safe for people to attend?
Jim, I know you left, like you mentioned, a large Fortune company last year. Are we allowed to name who that was?
No, I might slip up, but it's somebody can go to my LinkedIn profile and know, but respecting their policies and things like that.
Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to mention that is because within your book, and I think I've mentioned this in my Facebook group a few times, and I've shared it out, your book, Converged Security Metrics. I was wondering, how much did you working for your large company sort of reflect or feature within that book?
Yeah, I had the privilege of this thing called Converged Security. Is still talked about to this day as being a new concept. I don't know why, because that and many other companies that I've had the opportunity to peer with have been doing converged security for 40, 50 years. So this decentralized security model is the more newer of the two. And so I think the opportunity to cover not all, quite a number, thus the number of chapters in the book, areas of security really gave me a perspective that I thought was just, I was blessed to be able to look at all these different areas of security and then realize, as our friend, the late singer Carmen used to say, does this stuff work from the church house to the White House? And so I wrote this book, and my future books are really around that concept. Can these things work from the church house to the White House? And I think they can. And so the Lord blessed me with some opportunities to learn from that environment, along with speaking, along with teaching, along with working with churches, and just how do we mold that in so it does work across a lot of different industries or environments.
And what I loved about your book, Jim, is a couple of things I want to talk about. One I'll just mention now is around technology maturity, because when we talk to House of Worship, and I do a lot of work with schools, and I'll say to them, what's your technology roadmap? And they look at me like I'm an alien. I'm thinking, you must have a project plan as to where you're trying to get to. So I'm always amazed how much they don't. The second point I want to talk about in the book is personnel management. I said to you offline, but only yesterday someone reached out to me and said one of the biggest challenges I have is managing my volunteer work staff. But one of the biggest takeaways I took from your book, Jim, and I now say this, I use your line when I do security risk assessments. You say somewhere in the book when you do a risk assessment to look the stakeholder in the eye and say, are you prepared for the results of this risk assessment? And I can't remember which chapter it is, but as soon as I read that, I was like, well, Jim is right. I've never looked a stakeholder in the eye and said, are you ready for the results of the risk assessment, knowing that we're going to find vulnerabilities? Because quite often when we get to the report stage, they're like, well, there's so much here. I didn't know we were so far away. So I just love that question when you said, are you prepared for the results of the security risk assessment? Where did that particular line come from, Jim? Was that from experience?
Yeah. So was doing a doing some data analytics for a particular threat, and in a corporate environment, not the houses of worship environment, but a corporate environment, and doing some data analytics. And in there, we discovered some effectively some math and some data that when you started to chart it out, as I talk about in my book, red is bad, green is good. And so it was a lot of red. And we went to the person that would effectively need to take action. And the individual came and says, Jim, you want to know what I think of your data analytics? He says, you want to know how many more investigations or vulnerabilities that I want to be dealing with right now? You know, and he did the big fat zero kind of in my face kind of thing. And it was just kind of like, I could either be thrown off and go, what do you mean? Aren't you're supposed to love vulnerabilities and new cases and things like that? And that was the shock. That was the shock that said, and good professional friend of mine. So that stepped me back into a number of opportunities to teach on kind of analytics and metrics 101. And part of that is before you start this thing is the audience. And of course, the audience could be a client point of contact, as you mentioned, to a board of directors, to a board of regents at a school, whatever it is. Are they prepared for the results? And you're always going to have red and you're always going to have green, but are they prepared? And so that's ahead of time. And that may sound like an easy yes. But in this case, you know, if you go from a staff or a budget or something like that that can handle 5, and you find 50 more that you got to add onto that 5, how are you going to handle that new 50?
I also find as well, now I've started asking that question, it allows me to find out where could be the trigger points or the issues later, because honestly, some people are not prepared for the results and some people don't want to hear the results as well. So it may seem a very simple question, but I think if any of my listeners that have done a risk assessment before or have been around risk assessments, it's not something that we automatically ask. And we've all come against people that have said, no, I'm sort of, they'll say they're ready, but they're not really ready, as you mentioned, Jim. So I guess you touched on converged security metrics. Let's tell people then, so what does it mean? What's your book's called Converged Security Metrics. What does that definition mean to you, Jim?
Yeah, so how I've written it out many times and talked about it is really taking, and my pastor has a great quote that I mentioned in the book, all in every language in the Bible and all in every language around the Bible, all means all. And so when we look at all of security, it really says that we first recognize the need for all the different areas of security. Some are in the book, some are not in the book. And the need for at least recognizing the need for them, where we implement them, how we implement them, in what order and priority, a different conversation. Also, people think that converged security means they all report to the same person. No, it means that the board and the executives, and in this case, the pastoral staff, the board of that staff, the elders, whatever you call it, that governing body recognize that all the security elements that need to be in place. And so Converge says we're converging those. We're not siloing them so much because there is so many connections. You tell me any two, it's kind of like the Kevin, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Give me 2 areas of security and I can tell you where they're tightly linked. Fraud and cyber, absolutely linked. Physical security and cyber, absolutely linked. So in any of those things. So if we don't think about them together, we could be wasting money. We could just get so stopped up in some area, or we may totally forget it and then ultimately get surprised when an issue comes up.
Yeah, and if people haven't checked, I'm going to drop a link to your book below. But I mean, I really recommend, you can see I've got my little sticky notes for the things that I sort of read as I went through. And it's really a powerful book. And I've been in safety and security for a long time. And I got so much out of it, Jim. So I'm blessed that you wrote it. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there was just 2 concepts. There's a lot in the book, but there was 2 things I wanted to pick up on today, which I think are relevant for church safety and security. And the first one is about technology maturity. I'd love to get some perspective in relation to a church as to why is that important?
Yeah. So you've got a term called technology debt, and there's technology maturity. So I don't know of an organization out there, including my own, that doesn't have technology debt. What does that mean? Technology that is end of life, technology that is end of service from the manufacturer. Manufacturers is gone out of business or something like that. And so, obviously, as a church that wants to reach more people, you're going to have to use technology to do that, whether that's broadcasting or recordings or whatever like that. It's the old thing of going from cassettes to CDs to DVDs to online. If you're still doing cassettes because 25 people still need cassettes, great. It's not technology debt. But if you're still doing cassettes and you haven't figured out how to do a Zoom call of your services, you probably got some technology debt. So it's really maturing in every area. So if you take if you take an inventory of all the technology within your church, whether that is sitting on your desk as a laptop, did you know that your laptop in front of you has 84 different manufacturers of software on it? So just that alone can be, how do we mature that? How do we secure it? How do we make sure it doesn't become debt and thus an impact later on? So really, what's that inventory? Somebody says, well, how do I know what technology is out there? So I look at it in simple things. What has wires? And I'm not talking about electrical plugs, but what has wires? That's your technology in your building. And then where is your data and information, which typically is, maybe in a cloud service provider, a QuickBooks or something like that. If you just take those two and start building a spreadsheet of all of that inventory, then you start to realize, okay, what is all those things? And then start to look at dates. When did we sign up? Do we have a contract? When did we buy it? When did the software or hardware expire? Lots of dates around there. And start to, kind of color some of those cells. Red is bad, green is good. And then, of course, budget for that going forward. And so it's things like cameras that do cameras that shoot your service so you can record the service or broadcast it. That's one of the best security capabilities is the cameras that are actually recording your service. Because from a security perspective, if that's where the event happens, that might be where the only place you got a camera. And so we can talk about that, whole incident response just around engaging the camera guy out there. But so it's really around a regular inventory that's beyond a financial inventory, but truly is a technology inventory. So start with things with wires and things where your data is.
I love the technology debt, and I often use a term. It's more of a facilities term around deferred maintenance. And I work with a church. I won't name the church because I know he listens to the podcast, but this poor guy, he was really behind on technology. So they had a lot of technology debt. And then when we did the risk assessment and had proposals, Jim, it was somewhere like 200 grand investment is what they needed. And he's like, I've got to take this to my boss. She's not going to like it. She feels we're further ahead than what we are. And I said to him, look, this is a result of years of me using the facilities term now, deferred maintenance. I said, you're just in the chair when the music stops. I said, they should have been incrementally looking at this and saying, we need new cameras, we need access control, we need mass notification, we need all these things. I said, you're just a poor facilities manager. The music stops and all of a sudden it's going to cost you this big investment to get into it. So I did love that section. I love you talking about technology debt because I think the maturity is that people should be looking at this stuff, right, Jim, and saying how long is the lifespan of these cameras? What is the lifespan of this technology? And then if it's 5-10 years, do we need to do a capital campaign, or how are we going to get a budget to replace it when it does age out? Because every technology has a lifespan, right?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I had a client that had a new alarm system put into their building. Why? Because I won't mention the company name, but probably the majority of our basic alarm systems, the manufacturer of those alarm systems has now stopped manufacturing the panels and the little keypads. Now they're available in aftermarket, but those panels they're gone. They're no longer going to be more made, and the panels. So So this particular client says, hey, I'm going to take out all of that older stuff and we're going to put in some new stuff. So I put in some new stuff. And as soon as they installed it, the installer did not perform the upgrade. And then we talked to the manufacturer. We're like, hey, what's going on? The actual install had software on it that had not been supported or manufactured in over 5 years. This was not 5 years ago. This was January 2024 on that panel. So it's not just stuff you own, but stuff you need, like a security panel. And again, Simon, you know me and I know you. We're not here to scare people. It's about an inventory and methodical way of doing this to find your reds and find your greens.
And it is reality. Like I said, when I was talking to that facilities manager, it wasn't joking. I mean, that was the number. It was like $250,000 is what security integrators were quoting for the upgrades to the work. And it wasn't just one security integrator, Jim. There were several, but the proposals come out very similar. And there'd been no project plan. There'd been no technology roadmap. And as I mentioned, this security facilities leader was in the chair when the music stopped, and then he had to then take it upstairs and say, we need $250,000. And you can imagine how that goes. He couldn't really lead with, well, the last 4 guys neglected this, so I'm the one bringing the problem to you. I mean, that wouldn't have gone down well either. So it is real. It is real. So that's great, Jim. So I love that. So technology debt, making sure that I understand the lifespan of our technology. The second thing that I loved in the book, and I just underlined it in my notes here, was only yesterday someone reached out to me and he said one of the hardest groups of people to manage is a volunteer-based security in a church. And obviously you've done it in large infrastructure, fortune company, but I'd love to get your perspective on personnel management, because I know that is something that you touch on in the book as well. What type of words, wisdom, encouragement would you give to churches where a volunteer leader is trying to manage security personnel?
Sure. One of my first roles in overseas was a request to do an assessment of a converged security environment down in Caracas, Venezuela. And there was a major issue going on, a bright red issue going on. And a senior vice president says, can I talk to you? I said, sure. And my Spanish was very limited. So we went down to have a cup of coffee, and I'm a sweet tea guy. So it was one of those strong coffee, strong tea things. And he says, can you kind of tell me how to deal with all these, employee problems? And I said, sir, I've done this for many, many years. I said, there's only one solution I have found. He's, he got his pen out. He's ready to write it down. He's thinking someone's going to buy something.
So as I'm the same here. I've got my pen thinking Jim's going to give some great wisdom here.
I said, stop hiring humans. And of course, he looked in the mirror, and I showed him things that he was not prepared for, not doing. And, just, hey, I'm here to, but okay, stop asking for humans for volunteers. Now, there's solutions behind that, but it was the thought that came to my mind that I've used for many years, is that humans are humans. And so I wrote down in our great little break there, Simon, of kind of what I feel is in the volunteer side. I'm going to give 5 points here in no particular order, because I just wrote them down fast. But number 1 is, make sure when you're interviewing the folks, make sure that they want to be a servant first and not seeking authority.
Yeah.
Put them at what we used to, as you know, Simon, halls and walls. Put them halls and walls back where nobody can see them, and see how well they do it. So are they a servant first versus are they seeking some type of authority? We've heard the badge story and all these other things. Let's make sure we're getting servants onto our team first. And if they're not, and if they need help and understanding what that means, that's a spiritual and personal thing that we can help them with. And you think, well, everybody knows how to be a servant. Be careful with that. And so that's my first thing, is make sure you're bringing on servants first, not people seeking authority. Number 2 is minister to them. Whether that's giving them a Saturday, Sunday off to be able to attend the service, whether that's getting the pastors to come in and Minister to them, not just right before a service that they're going to serve as a safety person, but actually, hey, all the security team, you're coming in on Wednesday night, and we're going to minister to you. We're going to pray for you. We're going to feed you. We're going to speak words over you, whatever that looks like for your church, but minister to them. Because when they're in this mode of safety and security, if they're doing it right, they're locked in. And they're ministering, but they need to be ministered to. You can't let them forget. And they think, oh, I'm just a servant. I don't need, yes, yeah, they do. Number 3 is communications. Number one thing that I hear about all the time. And communications is more than a text. It's more than, emails. It's over communicating to the folks around schedules, timing on things. Make sure, even if you had to bring somebody on your team that is dedicated to communications. Think about in the classical corporate world, we have employee communications, volunteer communications, and security just gets, and not in a mean way, security and safety in churches gets forgotten in the overall communications world. And again, we don't want to be out on the front page all the time, still honor them, but communications, schedules, training, POIs, whatever that is, you got to take care of communications. Number 3 is, of course, is training. And training is a broad topic. Training on not just tactics that we traditionally do, but are we training them on confidentiality? Are training them on all the things that are in Simon's great decision decks? I love the product. It's training on that, but are we training them on the other things about how to minister? Maybe one of your servants is a great servant, great security safety person. Maybe they've never known how to pray for somebody. That's not being mean to them, but let's teach them also to be a minister. Let's not just teach them how to be a safety and security person. So training needs to be a plan, and let them see that plan. If there is a way to have some leadership in your training and safety program, display that. Show that there's a training and safety growth plan within that training plan. And then the last one is what I call after action reporting and actions thereof. On my website, askmcconnell.com, I have a self-after action report. Folks can download it. It's free. It's just a PDF out there. Take advantage of it. And it really says after every operating period, every service, every Sunday, every Saturday, every big event, whatever it is, each person should do their own after action report for their personal growth, but also an after action that goes up to the security and safety leader to say, here's what I went through, and learn from that. So after action, formalize that and actually take action on it. So if you see things in there, if you just have people filling out reports and filling out after actions generically, and you never do anything about it, very discouraging. Those are my top 5 to improve your volunteer program.
I love them, Jim. I'm just going to recap them very quickly. So serve first, or be a servant first, minister to your team, communication, training, and then after action review. And I love that you said in there confidentiality, because I've worked with an attorney's office and a church security team before where someone disclosed something they shouldn't have done. It got to the congregation, and that person then made a complaint. Very messy. It got Jim very, very quickly, just because the loose lips sink ships. That person needed a bit more understanding as to the depth of their responsibility. So, Jim, well, it's been great to talk to you. You mentioned Ask McConnell. One thing I would say is that some people reach out to me and say, Simon, when you do these interviews with people, aren't these your competitors? And here's what I would say. The good guys like Jim and me, we are just collaborators. And so I don't mind promoting someone else's work if I respect them, if I like what they do and appreciate what they do, because Jim is just like me. Jim is in Dallas. I'm in Minneapolis, but we're both serving the Lord. So I want you to tell people about your Ask McConnell website and how you can help churches.
Yeah, I askmcconnell.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So do a lot of things there. Publishing an article. I just published an article in the Church Security Networks magazine on church disaster response. Working on another one on church metrics for another magazine. So that's coming out here soon. But hey, I've got out there for churches. I've got a self-assessment, a church self-assessment checklist or self-assessment form that people can use for churches. It's really around the converged security. What security and safety things are you doing? What are you doing well? What are you not doing well? It's not an assessment of tactics or gear or anything like that, but who's managing all the different areas. And so that's out there. The after action report is out there. And then I just would be honored to help wherever I can. I have been blessed with the wisdom and knowledge to get all this information. And I would be I'd be a problem child if I did not give it back. And of course, as Simon says, sometimes you got to charge for that. But I love giving it away as pro bono, where from cowboy churches to mega churches, had the honor to support them all.
Jim, pleasure to be with you. And just a closing story. I was with a school client of mine, a Christian school client, 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had like an early morning meeting. So I hadn't yet had my cup of tea and wasn't really firing on all cylinders. And the head of the school board said to me, literally like 8 o'clock in the morning, he said, Simon, he said, when you die, we'll need to find you another occupation. It took me a little bit off guard. And then I realized what he was talking about. He said, Simon, he said, we won't need your skills in heaven. So we've got to find you another occupation. I said, there's many skills that I have. Don't you worry about me. But it did make me laugh about people like me and you, Jim, because when we get to heaven, we're going to need new occupations. We'll have to figure out what that is.
That's not a problem. I think we'll figure it out. But yeah, Simon, 3 things for your audience for Monday morning. Define the definitions and scope of your security and safety program. And it's not just the guys or girls that show up on Sunday to help in that area. Across all of your church operations, what does safety and security mean to you folks and its scope? Start and then mature it. And as I tell people, if the 7-Eleven has locks in the doors and they're still open 24/7, the church has started. If you say, I don't have a church security and safety program, yeah, you do. What you may not have a team, but you're doing security and safety. You started with locks on the doors.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Honor and privilege to be with you. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, sir.
And so I really want to encourage you to buy Jim's book, Converge Security Metrics. One is going to grow you as a security leader. And second, it's going to give you some insights that perhaps you didn't have before around safety and security. And I wasn't joking with Jim. When I went to Dallas to speak at a conference, I put a message out saying, if anyone's in the area would want to meet for a tea or coffee, please let me know. And I think Jim drove around 45 minutes to meet me. And then he then said, Simon, how you get into the airport tomorrow? I said, I was going to get an Uber. He said, no, let me come and get you. So, I mean, that is a real servant right there for someone that he didn't even meet. So that's why I love to collaborate with other security leaders that are aligned with me. So hope the conversation was beneficial to you. Really encourage you to check out Jim's book. It's on Amazon. I'll drop a link below. But for now, you stay safe, have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.